broken lines, broken strings, broken threads, broken springs.
The new Guardian's out. Hello, welcome to SF Live. I'm your host, Christina Marie Flores. Well, as executive editor of the SF Bay Guardian, our guest tonight holds one of the most important jobs in the voice of progressive opinion in San Francisco. Please help me welcome Tim Redmond. Hi, Tim.
Thanks, Christina. Happy to be on your show. This really isn't for me, so I moved to San Francisco instead of being more objective. And I wound up writing for the Bay Guardian because the Bay Guardian shared my vision of what a newspaper can be. Mm-hmm. You know, our motto is it's a newspaper's duty to print the news and raise hell. And that's what we try to do. We take stands on issues. I would argue that no newspaper is objective. No journalism is objective. It's all about what you decide to cover and what you don't cover.
Right.
It's not just about the way you slant articles, but what articles never make it into the paper. Mm-hmm. And we try to cover the city from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. We take a stand on issues. We say some things are okay and some things are not okay. This is despite the recession, this is one of the richest cities in America, one of the richest cities in the world. There are, at last count, I think 11 billionaires living in San Francisco.
Wow.
And we have 8,000 homeless people on the streets. That's not okay.
No.
That is not okay. That is a level of social inequality that is not acceptable in an American city. Mm-hmm. And when I cover stories about homelessness in the Bay Guardian, I don't cover them from the point of view of, oh, it's just one of those things. Homelessness is here. As Willie Brown said, it's a problem that'll never be solved. I look at this and say, how, in one of the wealthiest cities that has ever existed in human civilization, how can it be that we're allowing this situation to occur? So we look for solutions.
So when did this chasm, this whole that's separating the haves from the have-nots, when did this start? When can you trace that back? Because I grew up in the city, and I remember it used to be pretty much across the board. I went to school with people whose fathers and mothers did all sorts of things. It was much more united. Then it started pulling apart. Can we trace that back?
Yeah, we can. Two things, Prop 13 and Ronald Reagan. In fact, when you went to school here, there weren't homeless people all over.
No, not at all.
No.
Not at all.
What happened was, after Prop 13 passed, which is the Jarvis-Gann initiative that basically stops cities from raising property taxes, and then a few years later, other measures that stop cities and counties from raising taxes, government was less able to function as a social arbiter and as a force for social equality. And after Ronald Reagan got elected in 1980, the federal government systematically dismantled the social safety net, federal support for housing, and a progressive tax code. And essentially what happened at that point is, as business was deregulated in ways that we had never seen before. It was much, much harder for unionized workers to organize. And the tax code began to favor the rich and disfavor the poor. And federal housing money disappeared. It used to be that there was federal money to build affordable housing in American cities. Mm-hmm. Lyndon Johnson had the war on poverty. Money came into cities so that people who were in a marginal economic situation weren't homeless. Mm-hmm. That people at least had a place to live, even if they were unemployed for a long time, that you didn't have homeless families on the streets. Right. And this country has just gone, starting then, until now, in a very, very different direction. And you see the results of public policy on the streets every day, from the homeless people to the fabulous astronomical wealth that you've seen created in this country, where, as I say, the gap between up here and down here is dramatic and is profound. That is a result not of the invisible hand of Adam Smith. That is a result of particular social policies that were put in place at the federal level, at the state level, and at the local level.
Mm-hmm. And that played out in San Francisco. As I remember, I grew up in Noe Valley. Many of my artist friends and musician friends and that all of a sudden were priced out of where they were living, and they all moved to Oakland. They all moved away, and it changed. The whole complexion of the city changed. Then you'd start to see homeless coming in more and more. And what is the reason why a city can't look at that and just say that's wrong?
Well, they could, and they can. What happened in San Francisco in the 80s was that under then Mayor Dianne Feinstein, the city took the position that all development is good, and that all controls on growth, controls on rents are bad, that anything that's good for big business and landlords is good. And that's the position that Dianne Feinstein took. So we were unable to get through an effective rent control bill in San Francisco that would have limited rents when a building becomes empty, as they did in Berkeley. We were unable to get any controls on downtown development through during that period. And so what happened was the city very rapidly gentrified. When I moved to San Francisco in 1981, you could still get an apartment in a group house for $100 a month. My first apartment, you're your viewers are going to die when they hear this. My first apartment on the corner of Hayes and Fillmore, a nice big one-bedroom apartment with a big turret window, was $225 a month.
Oh my God.
And
yeah.
what the result of that was is no one I knew worked full-time. They were artists. They were musicians. They were involved in politics. Everyone I knew was active in something, and you just kind of had a job on the side to pay the rent and eat. And nowadays, young people who arrive in San Francisco, it's hard to imagine how you can do it because you need a high-paying job and you're working 3 jobs and you're working all the time just to pay the rent. It's hard to have time for this explosion of artistic stuff that we saw, and we still see in the city to a certain extent. But the cost of housing has dramatically changed San Francisco, and I would say that is something that is a matter of public policy. A city can say, as a matter of policy, we do not want to see gentrification occurring. We do not want to see, during the dot-com boom, so many wealthy people coming in from out of town and displacing the artists and the low-income residents who live here. You can pass laws to prevent that. Dianne Feinstein refused to do that. Willie Brown refused to do that. And it is because of those decisions that we're in the situation that we're in right now. San Francisco could have effective tenant protection laws. We could have effective rent control, although it's harder now with what the state of California has done. But again, that's a policy decision. You can make those decisions that it's important to a city to have young people, that it's important to a city to have artists, that it's important for a city to have musicians, that it's important for a city to be a place where immigrants can come and get a start. That's a policy decision you can make. And if you don't make that decision, you get the problems that we have now.
Yeah. And so many people came in, and I remember them coming in and saying, it's so quaint here. It's so lovely. All the artists and everything. And then the artists are gone. It's like you guys just priced us all out of this.
That's how
this
gentrification works, is people come in and say, oh, I want to live in a nice bohemian artist place.
Yes,
but I can pay more rent than you can.
Let's
And guess
keep
what?
the bohemian artist out.
Guess what? I can pay more rent than you, therefore you're going to lose your apartment. And unless cities step in and say we aren't going to allow this, it's going to happen. The demand for housing in San Francisco is insatiable. You can never build yourself out of a housing crisis in San Francisco. You can only regulate yourself out of it. And, when people who are landlords complain about this, I always say, landlords in San Francisco, unless you brought your property 10 minutes ago, even in this recession, it's going up in value. Homeowners and landlords have very little to complain about in this town. It's the people who are renters and who are newcomers and who are immigrants and who are artists and who need a little bit of help from the city. Those are the people we need to be thinking about.
Yeah. And Tim, but you and I, both being parents, have chosen to raise our children here and believe in the city and want the city to do well and want the city to be a wonderful environment for our children. And yet it's difficult.
It's difficult, but that's why I'm still here, and that's why I'm still at the Guardian every day, and that's why I get up and go to work every morning, because I believe in cities. And I believe in San Francisco. I believe that the future of America really isn't going to come from Washington, D.C., or from national stuff. It's going to come from cities. Cities have always been the crossroads of culture and the places where new ideas emerge. And San Francisco has always been one of those places. And I hope always will be. And that's I believe so deeply in this city and in trying to keep this a livable place that really that's what I do with my life.